George Washington was nobody's fool. Neither was Lady Huntington. At its most reductive, which is a nice way of saying crudely put, they were trying to broker a deal, and each, as tends to happen in deals, was trying to use the other for his or her own ends. What Washington wanted was to settle the back country with a hardy population who would not provoke another Indian war, and who would be well affected towards the new republic. If they spoke English, so much the better. If they were dissenters who, like the founders of Massachusetts, had reason not to like the king and his bishops, better still. If they were artisans and farmers, he'd be grateful. His interest was in populating the country sufficiently to support the necessary garrisons to keep the British from reneging on the peace treaty and the French and the Spanish from trying a land grab. And to do that, he had to keep the Native Americans quiescent. He had no hopes that they'd be converted en masse to Christian meekness. He simply wanted them first not to be provoked, and thereafter to be tied to the interests of the United States by trade and peaceful intercourse. To effect these ends, he was even willing, in default of congressional action, to sell the lands himself out of his veterans' bounties, although not, of course, at a discount. There's a reason he's on our money. What Selina Huntington wanted, naturally, was to send sufficient members of her connection, whole villages of them if she could, to plant the banner of Calvinistic Methodism in the New World, to outpace, outnumber, and outbreed the Wesleyans, and to convert the heathen savages, Indians included, although some of the good old boys back in the hills certainly qualified at least as well for that description. She wasn't particularly interested in the economics or the politics of populating the western lands so America could hold them, or in a merely secular civilizing of the Native Americans. She quite seriously intended that they be evangelized and converted, and their immortal souls saved, from which all other worldly benefits would follow. Although their motives differed, their interests converged, and it was only the glacial pace of congressional action or inaction, and the same old, and to Washington wearisomely familiar, perplexing embarrassments and difficulties of a pecuniary nature, that prevented the schemes being realized as they envisioned it, one of the great unremarked what-ifs of United States history. But the fact that the plan as promulgated didn't come off doesn't mean it faded away without expanding, rippling consequences. Their correspondence was brief. Their plans together were unfulfilled, and yet their interaction was meaningful for both. In the midst of revolution, war, peace treaties, reprisals, and the birth of a new nation, the Countess and the General shared first a correspondent in Phyllis Wheatley, America's premier black author and poet, then a correspondence, and eventually something of a friendship and something of a vision. The Countess had entrusted to her distant cousin the General her hopes of maintaining charities in the former colonies and evangelizing the Native Americans. The General came to endow what became Washington College, now Washington and Lee University, where one of America's first black clergymen was educated, and to move towards abolitionism. Their lives and correspondence and their actions touched at various points those of John Wesley and George Whitefield, Phyllis Wheatley, Oloda Equiano, the black British writer whose voice powerfully indicted slavery, the Reverend Sampson Occam, the Mohegan evangelist, and Granville Sharp, the pro-American British civil servant who midwifed abolitionism and helped create Sierra Leone. In the end, they helped to create the forces that evangelized the American frontier, put down slavery, gave the United States its standing sense of a special moral mission in the world, and made the nonconformist conscience a permanent factor in British politics. It is not often that a brief epistolary interaction, conducted by the sluggish transatlantic mails of the Age of Sail, and ending in the disappointment of a cherished project, can have had such portentous consequences. But then, Selina, Countess Dowager of Huntingdon, and George Washington were rather extraordinary people, even in an age in which there were giants in the earth.